The morning Rusty disappeared, Jack Morgan felt something crack inside his chest, something that had already been fragile for the 5 years since Sarah died. The old cattle dog had been his only companion through endless silent nights, the only living thing that seemed to understand the particular quality of his grief. Now even that was gone. Jack searched for 3 days straight. He rode through canyons and valleys, calling until his voice went hoarse, checking every gulch and watering hole within 20 miles of his ranch. But the desert had swallowed Rusty whole, leaving nothing but paw prints that faded into rock and sand. On the 4th morning, Jack sat on his porch watching the sun bleed across the horizon, a bottle of whiskey dangling from his hand. He'd stopped shaving, stopped eating regular meals, stopped pretending that any of it mattered. First Sarah to the fever, then his brother to a Comanche raid. Now Rusty. The desert took everything eventually. It was just a matter of time before it took him too. He was contemplating that very thought when he heard barking. Jack's head snapped up, heart suddenly thundering. That bark. He'd know it anywhere. He stumbled off the porch, squinting against the morning glare, and there, emerging from the heat shimmer like a mirage, was Rusty. But he wasn't alone. Behind the dog, moving slowly and clearly exhausted, was a woman. She wore traditional Apache dress, though it was torn and stained with dirt and what looked like old blood. Her long black hair hung loose around her face, and she moved with the careful deliberation of someone who'd been walking far too long on feet that could barely hold her weight. Rusty bounded up to Jack, tail wagging furiously, then ran back to the woman as if to say, "Look what I found. Look who I brought." The woman stopped about 30 feet away, swaying slightly. Her eyes, dark and haunted, met Jack's with a mixture of desperation and defiance. She said something in Apache, her voice cracked and dry. Jack didn't speak Apache, but he understood thirst when he saw it. He held up his hands, showing he was unarmed, then slowly retrieved his canteen from the porch. He walked toward her carefully, the way he'd approach a wounded animal. She watched him come, every muscle tensed to run despite her obvious exhaustion. When he held out the canteen, she stared at it for a long moment, clearly weighing whether this was kindness or trap. "It's just water," Jack said softly. "You look like you need it more than I do." She snatched the canteen and drank deeply, water spilling down her chin. When she finally lowered it, gasping, Jack got a better look at her. Mid-30s, maybe, beautiful despite the exhaustion etched into her features, and wearing something around her neck, a simple leather cord with 2 wedding bands threaded on it. She saw him looking, and her hand went protectively to the rings. "Husband," she said in heavily accented English. "Dead. Soldiers." Jack's jaw tightened. He knew those soldiers, the same ones who'd been pacifying Apache settlements for months, leaving widows and orphans scattered across the territory like tumbleweeds. "I'm sorry," he said and meant it. She studied his face, searching for deception, and finding only weary honesty. "Your dog," she said, gesturing to Rusty, who sat between them looking pleased with himself. "He find me? 2 days I walk, no water, ready to die. He bring me here." Jack looked down at Rusty with new amazement. Somehow, this mangy cattle dog had found a dying woman in the middle of the desert and led her back to the one man within 50 miles who might actually help her instead of turning her in. "What's your name?" Jack asked. She hesitated, then lifted her chin slightly. "Casa. It means dressed in furs, but I have no furs now. Nothing now. I'm Jack." He glanced back at his cabin, then at this Apache widow who'd somehow stumbled into his life via a dog he'd thought he'd lost forever. Every practical instinct told him to give her supplies and send her on her way. Harboring Apache was dangerous, illegal, the kind of thing that could get a man killed. But Sarah's voice echoed in his memory. "You've got a good heart, Jack Morgan. Don't let this hard land bury it. He made his decision. Come inside, he said. Get out of this sun. We'll figure out what to do next. Casa's eyes widened with surprise, then narrowed with suspicion. Why you help? Jack looked at the wedding rings around her neck, at the grief carved into her face that mirrored his own. Because I know what it's like to lose everything, he said simply. And maybe we're both tired of being alone. Casa stood in the doorway of Jack's cabin like a wild creature poised to bolt, her eyes darting to every corner, every window, cataloging escape routes. Jack pretended not to notice. He busied himself at the stove, heating water for coffee and the rabbit stew he'd made 2 days ago, and barely touched. Sit, he offered, gesturing to the table. You need food. She didn't sit. Instead, she moved slowly around the perimeter of the room, her fingers trailing across the rough-hewn walls, pausing at the photograph on the mantel, a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Your wife? Casa asked. Was. Jack's voice came out rougher than he intended. Sarah. Died 5 years ago come September. Fever took her in 3 days. Casa's expression softened almost imperceptibly. She touched the rings at her throat. My husband, Nantan. Strong name, mean leader. But soldiers don't care about strong. They kill everyone, children, elders. Her voice fractured. I hide in rocks. I hear everything. I hear my daughter. She stopped abruptly, turning away, her shoulders rigid with the effort of not breaking down. Jack's chest tightened. He'd been so consumed by his own losses, he'd forgotten that grief came in depths he hadn't even fathomed. At least Sarah had died peaceful, in their bed, with him holding her hand. What Casa had witnessed. I'm sorry, he said, knowing the words were useless but having nothing else to offer. I can't imagine. No, she agreed quietly. You cannot. Rusty, sensing the heavy sorrow filling the room, padded over to Casa and nudged her hand with his nose. She looked down at the dog, and something in her expression cracked. She sank slowly to her knees and buried her fingers in Rusty's fur, her whole body shaking with silent sobs. Jack turned away, giving her privacy, focusing on ladling stew into bowls. When her breathing finally steadied, he set a bowl on the table along with a piece of bread. Eat, he said gently. Then you can rest. There's a room in the back. It was supposed to be for our children, but we never... He cleared his throat. It's yours as long as you need it. Casa stood slowly, approached the table with visible caution, and sat. She ate like someone who hadn't seen food in days, which she probably hadn't. Jack tried not to stare, but he couldn't help noticing details. The grace in her movements despite exhaustion, the way she paused between bites, listening, always listening for danger. The fierce intelligence in her eyes that no amount of trauma had extinguished. When she finished, she met his gaze directly. Why you do this? White men who help Apache. Soldiers come. They kill you too. Maybe, Jack acknowledged, but I've been dead inside for 5 years. Maybe this is the first alive thing I've done in all that time. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You are different. So are you. He stood, collecting the bowls. Most people would have died out there. You kept walking, kept fighting. That takes something special. Take nothing special, she said bitterly. Just no other choice. Over the next week, an uneasy routine developed. Casa slept most of the first 2 days, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion. When she emerged, she insisted on helping. Jack protested. She was still recovering, still healing from whatever horrors she'd survived. But she was stubborn as a mule. She mended his clothes, tended the vegetable garden Sarah had planted that Jack had let go to seed, even helped with the horses. The animals responded to her the way Rusty had, with immediate trust and calm. Jack watched in amazement as she gentled his most temperamental stallion, whispering in Apache, her hands moving with practiced confidence. "You're good with them," he said one evening as they stood by the corral watching the sun set. "My people, we understand horses," she replied. "They are, how you say, honest. Not like men who speak peace but bring war." Jack couldn't argue with that. They stood in comfortable silence, Rusty lying between them, until Casa spoke again. "I should leave soon. Not safe for you. Not safe for you out there either. I cannot stay forever." "No," Jack agreed, though the thought of the cabin returning to its previous emptiness made his chest ache. "But maybe until you're stronger, until we figure out somewhere safer for you to go." She turned to look at him, really look at him, and Jack felt something shift in the air between them. Not romance, it was too soon, too raw for that, but recognition, understanding. Two broken people who'd found unexpected solace in each other's company. "You are lonely, man," Casa said softly. "You're a lonely woman." "Yes." Her hand drifted to the rings at her throat. "But I think maybe lonely is different when you lonely together." 3 weeks after Rusty brought Casa to his ranch, Jack rode into town for supplies. He'd put it off as long as possible, knowing the risk, but they were low on flour and coffee and the other essentials he couldn't produce himself. He left before dawn, hoping to avoid attention, but the moment he tied his horse outside the general store, he felt eyes on him. Tom Fletcher, the store owner, served him with unusual coldness. "Heard you've been keeping to yourself even more than usual, Jack." "Nothing unusual about that," Jack replied evenly. "Also heard you've got a new dog." Tom's eyes were sharp. "One that went missing for a few days. Makes a man wonder where it went, what it might have found." Jack's blood ran cold, but he kept his expression neutral. "Rusty's a good dog. Gets curious sometimes. Always comes home, though." Tom bagged the supplies with deliberate slowness. "You know Lieutenant Morrison's been asking questions. Says there was an Apache woman who escaped the raid on the Broken Rock settlement. Says she headed this direction. Lot of empty space between Broken Rock and my ranch." "True enough." Tom leaned forward. "But Jack, if you know something, if you've seen something, you need to report it. Harboring Apache is treason. They'd hang you for it." Jack paid for his supplies and met Tom's gaze steadily. "Haven't seen anyone, but I appreciate your concern." The ride home felt twice as long, dread coiling in Jack's stomach. Tom would talk. Within days, maybe hours, Morrison would come knocking. He had to warn Casa, had to prepare. But when he reached his ranch, something was wrong. The front door stood open. Rusty was barking frantically from inside. Jack's heart hammered as he dismounted and rushed toward the cabin, hand on his pistol. He found Casa on the floor, gasping for breath, her face pale and sweating. At first he thought someone had hurt her, but then he saw the snake bite on her calf, 2 puncture marks already swollen and dark. "Rattlesnake?" she managed. "In the garden." "I didn't see." Jack's mind raced. The nearest doctor was in town, and taking Casa there meant certain capture. But if he didn't do something fast, she'd die right here on his floor. He scooped her up, laid her on the table, and grabbed his knife from the drawer. "This is going to hurt," he warned, then made quick incisions over the bite, pressing to draw out venom. Casa gritted her teeth but didn't cry out. He sent Rusty running to the neighboring ranch. The dog had been trained to fetch help, then focused on keeping Casa conscious, applying poultices of tobacco and herbs Sarah had taught him about years ago. All the while, he talked to her, keeping her awake, keeping her fighting. "You don't get to die," he said fiercely. "You hear me? You survived soldiers, survived the desert, survived losing everything. You don't get to die from a damn snake." "Maybe. Easier," she whispered. "No." He gripped her hand. "Not easier. Not allowed." Hours passed in a haze of fear. Her fever spiked. She began speaking in Apache, calling out names. Her husband. Her daughter. Jack held her through it all, wiping her forehead, forcing water between her lips, refusing to let her slip away. Just when he thought he might lose her, when her breathing had grown so shallow he could barely detect it, Rusty returned with Jack's neighbor, old Doc Hartley, who'd retired from medicine but still kept his supplies. "Jesus, Jack," Hartley breathed when he saw Casa. "Do you know what you've... Can you save her or not?" Jack cut him off. Hartley looked at Jack, at the desperate determination in his eyes, and something in the old doctor's face softened. "Move aside. Let me work." For 3 more days, Casa hung between life and death. Jack never left her side. He talked to her about Sarah, about his dreams for the ranch, about how Rusty had saved them both by being foolish enough to wander off and wise enough to find his way home. He told her things he'd never told anyone, pouring out 5 years of grief and loneliness to an unconscious woman who might never wake to hear them. On the 4th morning, her eyes opened. "Jack," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm here." He squeezed her hand. "You're going to be okay." Tears slipped down her temples. "Why you fight so hard? For Apache widow? For stranger?" Jack thought about that question. Really thought about it. And realized the answer had changed somewhere along the way. "Because you're not a stranger anymore," he said simply. "And I'm tired of losing people I care about." Her fingers tightened around his. "I care too," she admitted. "I didn't want to. Tell myself you just kind white man that I leave when strong. But Jack, I think maybe I don't want to be alone anymore either." Something fierce and hopeful bloomed in Jack's chest. "Then stay. Not forever if you don't want. But for now. We'll figure out the rest together. Morrison will come. Let him come. We'll be ready." Casa managed a weak smile. "You are brave, foolish man. Learned from the best." He glanced at Rusty, who'd positioned himself at the foot of the bed like a guardian. "Dog wandered off and came back with exactly what I needed. Figured I should take the hint." Over the following weeks, as Casa recovered, they planned. Doc Hartley, who'd decided keeping their secret was worth the risk, helped spread word that Jack had been nursing a sick relative. They created a story, built a cover, prepared for the inevitable confrontation. When Lieutenant Morrison finally arrived, he found a neat ranch, a healthy Jack Morgan, and absolutely no evidence of the Apache widow he'd been hunting. He searched thoroughly, too thoroughly, but found nothing incriminating. Casa had been hidden in a dugout cellar Jack and Doc Hartley had constructed specifically for that purpose. After Morrison left, frustrated and suspicious but empty-handed, Jack helped Casa out of the cellar. They stood in the evening light, Rusty between them, looking at the vast empty land surrounding them. "How long we live like this?" Casa asked quietly. "Always hiding?" "I don't know," Jack admitted. "Maybe forever. Maybe just until things change." He turned to face her. "But I know I'd rather live 100 years looking over my shoulder with you here than spend one more day alone."